on a topic which I've called the 6 principles of harmonious living. In Chinese, it's Liu He Jing. The 6 principles of harmonious living is found both in the Theravada text and in the Mahayana text. But in the Mahayana text, it is more organized, elaborate, and more discussion made on it. But in the Theravada text, it's just very briefly mentioned. So I would like to discuss with you the 6 principles of harmonious living. The Buddha has given many precepts to his disciples so that they can live harmoniously. But the precepts alone cannot ensure that we live harmoniously. The precepts are external rules and regulations which we impose upon ourselves so that we can live harmoniously. But within our own self, there must be some principles which we have to do. So the Buddha also mentioned there are 6 principles which we have to follow so that we can live very harmoniously. So among the 6 principles, the first principle is the unity in views. To hold the same views, 见和, to hold the same views. And this is in fact a very important principle. Under this principle, it means that we must hold the same views in order that we can live very happily. In a religious organization, we must hold the same worldview, the same ideas about our religion. Then only can live happily. In the political world, it means we must have the same ideology so that we can live happily. In the business world, it means that you must know and follow the company's mission, purpose, and objective. All of us must agree with that. Then we can live happily. So in a religious organization, we must have the same views. And for Buddhists, we must have certain views which all of us share in common. Otherwise, because of wrong views, we quarrel. People can live together, but if they have different views, they tend to quarrel. Just like you find Christians and Buddhists seldom get along because they have different views on life. People of different views tend to be separated. So it's important that for us, we must have the same views. But a lot of us tend to hold wrong views, even though we claim to be Buddhists. And even Buddhists hold wrong views. Before we talk about the right views in Buddhism, we talk about the wrong views, which have been discovered even during the time of the Buddha. The first wrong view is that we believe that things happened because it is fated. The belief in fate, F-A-T-E, fate. So a lot of us, although we are Buddhists, sometimes when something happens, we say fated. Somebody crossed the road, got knocked down by a lorry, we say fated. But that is not Buddhistic. Buddhists don't believe in fate. But sometimes we Buddhists, although we believe in karma, law of birth, law of cause and effect, after some time, when there's some accident happen, you say, oh, they want fated. That means we are not very sure of our views. We are a little bit confused. And then another wrong view is believe that everything is predetermined by God. So God decides everything. So if you are born crippled, that is God's wish. If there's an earthquake, that is an act of God. So much so nowadays, we just accept act of God as natural disaster means act of God. When God gets angry, He just exercise some power, then there will be earthquake, there will be fire, flood, and all those things. All act of God. And so if you are born poor, that's God's wish. If you are born rich, also God's wish. Then if you strike lottery, also God's wish. If you fall ill, sicknesses, also God's wish, or Deva's wish. And for a lot of us, even though we are Buddhists, sometimes we also believe these sort of things, isn't it? Sometimes something happened, somebody got sick. That fellow may be a Buddhist, but when he falls sick, instead of going to see doctor, they bring him to go and see all the angkong. Because they say, this man falls sick. Because why? Huan di angkong. Isn't it? Antagonize the God, so God punish him. And that some Buddhists believe like that. Again, the Buddha has mentioned these are wrong views. So this is not the correct view. And then another wrong view is to believe that things happen without cause and effect. Which means to say things happen randomly without any purpose. That means it is actually a very materialistic worldview. You do good doesn't mean you get good result. Do good can be bad result, can be good result. Do bad also can be bad result, can be good result. There is no law in it. It just happened. So some people believe this kind of worldview. Again, the Buddha rejected this as wrong views. So what then is the Buddhist views? The Buddhist views is the law of cause and effect. We always believe in cause and effect. We believe that for a single thing to happen, there must be many causes, not one single cause. For example, to have this talk here today, many causes. A number of participants must be here, the mic must be ready, the speaker must be here, the roof must be here, the floor must be here. So many conditions must be fulfilled, then only this talk is possible. So many causes. So the Buddhist views on life is cause and effect. Extend into our mind also. So if you have a bad view, if you have a bad intention, there is bound to be bad effect. So it always go on cause and effect, cause and effect. The cause becomes the effect becomes the cause. So in this cause and effect, where is the beginning? There is no beginning. So when we ask a question like, where is the first beginning? We are asking a wrong question. And therefore you can expect a wrong answer. Or no answer. That's why during the time of the Buddha, many people asked the Buddha with wrong questions. And therefore the Buddha kept silent. Because some people cannot grasp this. Now if you grasp the concept of cause and effect, and you know that many causes to bring about one effect, you are not going to ask where is the first cause. Because there is no such thing. There is no such things. The theistic religion always believe that, well, it's first cause. The first cause is God. Then you ask, God? Before God, what happened? Some will just ignore, and some will say, God no need to have a beginning. Exactly, if God need not have a beginning, then everything does not have a beginning. If everything not have a beginning, that is perfectly a Buddhist view. It goes on and on. It's an infinity from going in both directions, to the past, to the future. It's all infinity. So in this law of cause and effect, we notice that everything is changing, because all the effects are changing, causes are changing, and therefore everything is on the change. It's not permanent. That's why we have this law of anicca, means the law of impermanency. That we must understand. Impermanency is a natural phenomenon. It is part of the law of cause and effect. It is impermanence. And we Buddhists, some people say we are very pessimistic because you all think everything is impermanent. You need to work hard. But think of it the other way around. If everything is permanent, then there's no more to strive. Just because everything is not permanent, that's why we can strive for the better, isn't it? So we are not pessimistic. We are not optimistic. We are very realistic. That is the way of life. Then, Because everything is changing, it is changing. In this process of change, we cannot find complete satisfactoriness. That's why we call dukkha. For example, we are happy, the conditions make us happy at this moment. Maybe another 2 or 3 hours later, you will be with a sour face. You feel very unhappy. Conditions have changed. Because change, things keep on changing. And therefore, everything is uncertain. And therefore, we say it is dukkha. We say it's dukkha. It is unsatisfactoriness. And for the human life, it means in terms of emotions, in terms of our emotion, it means we can have happiness, we can also have sadness. And all this, as far as the spiritual development is concerned, is still not satisfactory. That's why we say it's dukkha. Then, in this law of cause and effect, of change, of dukkha, we say there is no entity or there is no self. We say there is anatta. There is no self. Why? Because everything is the result of many other causes. Therefore, that something has got no entity, has got no self of its own. For example, you look at me, I got my head, I got my hand, I got legs, etc., etc. When all these things comes together in one piece, and everything in good working order, that is called Ang Chu Hong. It's working. Then if it's not in good order, if I take my head and put somewhere else, my hand put somewhere else, leg put somewhere else, stomach put somewhere else, all in disintegrated, where is that Ang Chu Hong? Has he disappeared? He has not disappeared, he has neither appeared, because when the conditions were all together, it appears as such. When the conditions disappear, then it's not there. In the first place, there is no such entity as I, Just like this watch. This watch works because there were many other conditions making it work, isn't it? If I start dismantling part by part, all over the place and lay it down, where's the watch? We say there's no entity, no self. There's no watch there. The watch does not disappear, but in the first place, there's no watch. When you put all these things together, then you give it a name, call it a watch. You call it a watch. But this watch has got no entity. Same thing for the human life. We are the compound of the 5 aggregates. So when the 5 aggregates are there, we are breathing, we say this is a human life. When we stop breathing, when we start disintegrating, our hands drops, then the life disappears. It disintegrates. So in this law of cause and effect, we say, when the conditions are fulfilled, some things will appear. When the conditions disappear, then something else disappears. This is what is mentioned by Venerable Asaji to the Venerable Sariputta. When Sariputta and Moggallana, how do they come to know Buddhism? Sariputta and Moggallana, they were good friends. They were learning from many religious leaders, but they couldn't find the truth. Then, one day, when the Venerable Sariputta was walking along the street, he noticed there was an ascetic, very dignified. He admired very much. That Venerable is the Venerable Asaji, one of the first 5 disciples of the Buddha. So he approached the Venerable Asaji and asked the Venerable Asaji, after he has sat down everything, then he asked, who is your teacher? Can you tell me something about your teacher's teaching? And the Venerable Asaji, being very polite, I don't know much. That's the tradition of the Indians and Chinese. We are always very humble. We say, I don't know much. I can't tell you much. Then the Venerable, and usually we ask 3 times. So after asking 3 times, then the Venerable Sariputta says, you need not have to tell me much. Just tell me the essence of what your teachers teach. And then the Venerable Asaji answered, My teacher taught me, when all the conditions are fulfilled, the things arises. When the conditions disintegrate, things also disappear. In Chinese, 诸法因缘生，诸法因缘灭. That is the essence of the Buddhist teachings. Essence of the Buddhist teachings. And that's come from the mouth of the Venerable Asaji. So cause and effect is the essence of the Buddhist teachings. So from there, the Venerable Sariputta, after listening, he got enlightened, isn't it? Slightly enlightened. But for us, we are confused. Because we are worldlings. Putujana. We hear all these things, we get confused. Because it's so easy to understand the law of cause and effect. Now, because because of all this law of cause and effect of this conditioned world, there is an unconditioned state, an absolute state out of this, and that's called Nibbana. And for us Buddhists, we try to achieve that state, from this state of condition to that state of unconditioned, from this state of unsatisfactoriness, of dukkha, to another state of absolute bliss. That is the right views in Buddhism. So, many things we do, ask ourselves, does it follow the law of cause and effect? If you think you can come and then you make the Buddha from one face to four face and pray this side for health, that side for prosperity, you think does it fall in line with the law of cause and effect in Buddhism? So there are many things, many questions which we can answer by just asking ourselves, falling back on these right views in Buddhism, whether it follows the right views in Buddhism or not. Some people says you commit sins, then you must go and confess, your sins will be washed away. For the Buddhists, if you have done the wrong things, the effects will come. You can feel sorry for that. You can, try to repent with good motive, but that bad result may still come. And depending on how heavy is the bad result, it may still come. Buddhist does not guarantee you that by confessing, all your sins will be washed away, because that does not follow the law of cause and effect. If you have watched the TV this morning, can you tell me now that I want to undo watching the TV? Can you undo watching it? You have watched it already, isn't it? You have seen it already, you know it already. Now I want to wipe it out completely from you. Is it possible? As if nothing has happened before? It's not possible. It's common sense. Buddhism applies to a lot of our common sense. So that is the right views we hold. So for the Buddhists, it's very important that when we hold these right views, that's why the Mahayana and the Theravadas, when they still fall back to these right views, still the Buddhists can live happily together. The many other manifestations and are actually peripherals. The discussions on the Bodhisattva ideas, the discussions of whether there is a Trikaya of the Buddha, all these are actually not so important. The discussion of the four-faced Buddha or the four-faced Brahma, all these are actually not very important. What is very important is that all of us grasp the essence of Buddhism. The law of cause and effect, the law of karma. So if all of us can have all the same right views, then naturally we can live very much happily. We can have a harmonious living within our Buddhist community. So that was the first principle the Buddha mentioned. Then the second principle the Buddha mentioned was unity in precepts, which means all of us keeps the same precepts. If you keep precepts, but the rest of the world don't keep precepts, you also be in problem, isn't it? If here in this crowd here, half keep precepts, another half don't keep precepts, we also feel very worried, isn't it? We ourselves don't feel saved. So precepts in order that all of us in a community can live happily, all of us must share the same precepts and observe the same precepts without exceptions. Not, every one of you keep 5 precepts, but I alone can break the 5 precepts. Then this world will be chaotic, isn't it? So the Buddhist teaching, although it asks us to keep 5 precepts, it also encourages others to keep 5 precepts. Everyone should keep. When everybody keeps 5 precepts, then the world is a very peaceful place to keep, to live. What are the precepts for? What are the precepts for? Have we ever pondered what are the precepts for? For ourselves? For whose good? For what purpose? The precept is meant for ourselves, also meant for others. If you live somewhere alone, where you got nothing to steal, then there's no need to observe precept of stealing, isn't it? There's nothing to steal. So we observe precept because we consider others, all other beings around. The Buddhists observe the precepts of no killing because there are other more vulnerable beings around which can easily be destroyed by human beings. But because we have a heart of compassion, we think of them and therefore we don't kill them, so that they also can live. And we are vulnerable to other beings also. If we are thrown in the jungles with tigers and lions around, tigers and lions are stronger than us, they can eat us up. But if tigers and lions observe 5 precepts, we are safe. But if they don't observe 5 precepts, we are in danger. Then we complain, isn't it? Same thing, all other beings also complain if we simply destroy their life. So, the precept is meant for everybody. It's meant for the comfort of everybody. So when we observe precepts, sometimes this question is asked. People ask me this question. When you Buddhists observe all these precepts, don't you find it very difficult to live? Very inconvenient? How many of you think that by observing precepts, you become very inconvenient? My answer is, precepts is meant to convenience us, not meant to inconvenience anybody. The precept is meant to convenience us and convenience the whole society. The precepts are not meant to make life inconvenient for me, inconvenient for everybody. The precept becomes inconvenient to you, maybe at the beginning. But as it becomes part of your life, it becomes very convenient for you, it becomes very convenient for others. The precepts may be difficult to observe at the beginning, but as it becomes part of your life, it is something easy. So take the precepts in the right perspective. Precepts are not restrictions which we impose upon ourselves and make ourselves so inconvenienced, or imposed by the Buddha to make us so inconvenienced. The Buddha has mentioned precept, sila. The Pali word sila or sikha means discipline which we take upon ourselves. The Buddha did not say this is the law, you must observe. If it's the law and I have to observe, of course it's very difficult, isn't it? And I don't like it. But why the Buddhas use the word precept, the word sila, the word code of ethics? Because it's something that you should realize for yourself that it is for your good and for others' good, therefore you observe. That's the purpose of precepts. So precepts should make us feel more comfortable to live. Just take an example like street lights. If you take the street light as a precept for traffic rules, for traffic flow. With the traffic light, when you are new, traffic light is very inconvenient, isn't it? You go to town, you got to stop so many traffic lights. Very inconvenient. But without traffic light, you go 5 minutes, you can reach Jalan Bandar. How nice. Very convenient. Now with all the traffic lights, so difficult. But what happens if you break it? Then maybe you endanger your life, you endanger other people's life. So if you take it in the right perspective, all these rules are good for me, good for others. And it becomes part of your life now. Now everybody accept it as part of your life now. When you see the red light, you must stop. But if you don't appreciate it, you say the government is making life miserable for me. Every time red light, I must stop. Yellow, I must slow down. Green only, I can go. Why make all this restriction on me? But if you think about the society in which we live now, there are so many rules and regulations imposed on us. Life is very difficult for us. You cannot simply throw rubbish. The government, Bandaraya, will fine you $50. You say, very inconvenient. After eating the kacang, I must collect all the husk around like that and put in your pocket. Actually, in my car, I carry a waste paper basket. So everything I throw inside the plastic bag. But otherwise, it'd be more convenient to just wind out the windscreen and throw it out. But what inconvenience you may inconvenience others. So we take the precepts in the right spirit. Precepts are not meant to inconvenience anybody. It's actually meant to convenience us. So for the lay Buddhists, we observe the bare minimum 5 precepts. Then from time to time, you all come and observe the 8 precepts to give yourself more spiritual training. So when the society observe, society is a very happy society. If the Buddhist community all observe 5 precepts, you don't slander me, I don't slander you. You don't tell lies, I don't tell lies. Very nice to live, isn't it? So the Buddha says, observe the precepts, every one of us. Then the third point, the Buddha mentioned sharing of benefits. Sharing of benefits. Whatever benefits we have, we share. For the monks, when they go out, not all the monks go out, not hundreds and thousands of monks go out during the time of the Buddha. Only a proportion of them goes out for alms round. After collecting the alms back, then share out all. Evenly. Not, wow, you think this is nice, you keep for yourself. This is not nice, you give to other monks. Or you come back, you take your bowl and you eat. Not sharing. So same thing for our Buddhist community. Always sharing. Sharing whatever benefits we have. Especially spiritual benefits. In the world we live is mostly talking about material benefits. That's where we are encouraged to do dana. The world is a very happy world, a very harmonious world if everybody practice dana. You help me, I help you. Everybody practice dana. The neighbors help you to look after your garden. You help your neighbor to pay water bill. Or if human beings all can live very happily, practicing dana, sharing whatever benefits they have, isn't it very nice to live? Same thing in our Buddhist community, always we share. And whatever Dharma knowledge we have, whatever Dharma experience we have, we share it out. If you meditate and you find that meditation gives you calm, serenity, share it with other people. Don't keep it to yourself, so that everybody share. And then you organize a society, you have functions, you open it to everybody, all your members, so that everybody share it. You don't install one aircon in your room. The rest cannot enjoy aircon. Only I can enjoy aircon. Of course, there may be rules and regulations regarding some usage. Like you have books. You may have plenty of books. Share it. Open up 3, there's a library so that everybody can come and live. Like I noticed this temple, maybe it's a small temple, maybe it's not so, grand as other temples, but full of activities. Share it out, and you will grow. No point having big temples, big organizations, big memberships, but nothing much going on. Most of the time, quiet. Whenever people want to come, you start scrutinizing that fella as if he's a great gangster. Some organizations do like this, Go ask people to go and find out about the background of this fella, that fella, and all things, making it very difficult. So it's important for us to share, especially Dharma sharing. Now, sharing the same views, sharing the same precepts, sharing the same benefits, these are the 3 basic principles we have to live with. With these 3 principles, then the other 3 are external manifestations. The 3 things are, Number one, the other three. All of us must have the right actions, which means no killing, no stealing, no lying within our own community. Right speech and right thoughts. Right speech, right thoughts, right actions. Or we call it harmonious in speech, harmony in speech, harmony in thoughts, and harmony in actions. So harmony in actions, no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, then everybody can live much happily. When there is killing, there is stealing, there is sexual misconduct, there will be a lot of problems. Then we cannot live happily. Harmony of speech, that is one of the most important things. A lot of problems arise because we don't have harmony of speech. All of us are given one mouth, 2 ears, so that we listen more, talk less. But instead, normally our ears is one go in, the other side go out. And our mouth is just keep on talking. So, in the process of talking, if we give the right speech, it's okay, but we give the wrong speech. So there are 4 types of wrong speech. We know frivolous speech, speech which makes people think wild, which make people think, people's mind wander. We give this type of speech. Harsh speech, we scold people, we make life miserable for people, we curse people. Harsh speech. Then lying, not telling the truth. So things can become very bad because people don't tell truth. And then slandering, carrying tales. This lying and slandering sometimes come together. You slander people and you must lie. And in the society in which we live, I noticed that a lot of problems arises because people don't tell the full truth, or they tell half truth, which amounts to more or less lying, and therefore makes people cannot live together. So especially when we run a Buddhist society, a Buddhist community, it's very important that we treat each other as brothers and sisters, don't tell lies, tell only good speech, encouraging speech. You may have 10 community members, you may find that only 2 or 3 are working, another 4 or 5 are we call passengers. You may have 10 community members, you may find that only 2 or 3 are working, another 4 or 5 are we call passengers. Well, I think you are good because you have passengers. Some don't even have. So accept passengers. You cannot expect the whole world, everybody to be the leaders, everybody to be working. Even the whole human society today, only 20% are very concerned, another 80% couldn't be bothered what's happening in the world. So in a community, in a Buddhist group society, you may have 20% willing to become leaders. And out of the 20% willing to become leaders, maybe 20% willing to work, another 80% willing to criticize. You have to live with that, You cannot. You may develop, may be lazy. But by saying that he is lazy, he's not doing his work, and telling everybody that he's lazy, he's not doing his work, do you help him? The Buddhists always take this view that if he is bad, I am to be blamed. It is just like everybody is like our brothers and sisters. If my brother is bad, I am partly to be blamed. So if he is lazy, I am partly to be blamed. If he cannot get his work done, I am partly to be blamed. So if he cannot get his work done, I must see how can I help him to get his work done. So if your secretary, always, you ask him to do the work urgently, he will take another 1 week. Then perhaps you can help him to get things done. Let him get it done. Help him, coach him, get along with him. Then get it done. Because we have a duty to help another person. Not every person in this world are the same. Now the trouble in this world is that we take ourselves as a standard, and everybody else measure according to our standard, and therefore everybody else is unsatisfactory. And that somebody else also use himself as a standard and measure us. And therefore the whole world, nobody is satisfactory. When we compare ourselves like this, there's only one standard for us to follow, and there's the Buddha. And all of us are not the standards to follow. All of us ask, try to follow the Buddha. So it's important that we have to be not to be too discriminating on human behavior. Then, apart from speech, we also have this harmony in thoughts. Thoughts of greediness. Greediness. How nice if this is mine. How nice if that is mine. How nice if this temple belongs to me. That's greed. Or you see people donate money, $200 into the box. How nice if this money belongs to me. That is greed. Then, hatred. We dislike. It's sometimes not surprising to find that within our own community, we also find some people dislike some people. I don't like that fella. I don't talk to that fella. Now, we Buddhists should not do like this. We should be examples. We may not agree with each other, but don't need to dislike each other. You can dislike his behavior, but don't dislike him. You can disagree with his opinions, but don't disagree with him. We human beings sometimes, because of our attachment, this is another law of cause and effect, or what we call yanqi, where you take a person as an entity already. So whatever comes out of him is wrong, you blame him. But actually what comes out of him, if you are good enough, you can separate. That is his opinion, but that is him. So politicians are always like that. And that is my political opinions. You and me can be good friends, but we differ in opinion. But not just because of his opinions, I dislike you. And with my many years of activities in associations, Buddhist associations, Chinese associations, I noticed there are a lot of people who cannot separate this. The moment you give differing opinions, you are a dissident. And I will try to get rid of you as fast as possible. Because you are a troublemaker. Every time we come to meeting, you will ask all sorts of questions, raise all sorts of troubles, and therefore I will put all my efforts to try and get rid of you. And of course we cannot live harmoniously. So don't harbor hatred. You can disagree with that fellow, but no need to hate him. When the Dalai Lama was chased out of Tibet, the Dalai Lama said, I have absolutely no hatred for the Chinese people. It is possible to practice that. Mahatma Gandhi fought with the British like anything. So some of us thought that Mahatma Gandhi hated the British. Not at all. Some of the Mahatma Gandhi's closest friends are the British people. And he has got no hatred at all for the British people. He only disliked the way that they have ruled India. And he disliked that they rule India. He wants them to go back. But he got no hatred for them. So same thing, we must cultivate the same right attitudes. We can have disagreement among ourselves, but we should not hate people. So with this, I have briefly mentioned to you the 6 principles within the matter of half an hour. Was it half an hour? So I shall now end my speech here. Perhaps if you have any questions, I shall be glad to discuss with you for another few more minutes now. Okay? It does not specifically come from any particular sutras. It is mentioned here and there. See, when the Buddha preached, the Buddha normally just preached off the cuff. Later days, during the first council, people arrange it into sutras. So you have certain sutras. There are certain sutras which the Buddha taught one shot. For example, Sigalovada Sutra. He talked to the Sigalovada and it's compiled as Sigalovada Sutra. But there are certain sutras which are actually not one single sutra, But later on, people compile it into a sutra. Actually, the Buddha taught here and there, so it becomes a sutra. So sometimes certain things that you don't find in one particular sutras, it can be found in many sutras.
Did he mention anything about, let's say, Kuan Yin or Maya, Buddhism, and so on?
This question is actually very difficult to be answered. Because the Mahayanas believe that the Buddha preached in at least 3 sutras about Kuan Yin Bodhisattva and Amitabha Buddha, in at least 3 sutras. But if you were to take from a historical perspective, of course the Theravada rejected this. In the Theravada traditions, all these sutras cannot be found. After the first council organized by the emperor, 3 months after the Buddha's Mahaparinibbana, first council was organized, the sutras were arranged, and some of these sutras were taken to as far as Sri Lanka and kept until today. So all these sutras you cannot find. But even in Theravada sutras, in one of the 2 Theravada sutras, you can find the word Amitabha Buddha mentioned. But there's no specific sutras which talk about Amitabha and Kuan Yin. Now historians believe that these are actually later developments, because Kuan Yin Bodhisattva actually, even during the time of the Buddha, the Indians believing in the Hindu religions, they already believe in the Hindu god Avalokitesvara. So after the Buddha preached Buddhism, a lot of people become Buddhist. Some of them were Hindus. They also become Buddhists. They carry along with them the ideas, doctrines of Hinduism, into Buddhism. And some of them become Buddhist scholars also. And they know how to incorporate this into Buddhist teachings. And after about 500 or 600 years after the Buddha's time, Hinduism begins to come out again. In order to counter Hinduism, some of these Buddhist scholars who has got his background as Hindus, they try to come up with something to counter the revival of Hinduism. And therefore they introduce Avalokitesvara as a Buddhist Bodhisattva, no more as a Hindu god, so that the Hindus can still come and believe in Buddhism and still can pray to Avalokitesvara. So this is how historically it happens. So these are all developments over the time. We cannot say it is good or bad. It is a necessity in order that Buddhism can survive at that time. If not because of these efforts put in by those scholars, Buddhist scholars, to incorporate some of these Hindu teachings or Hindu personalities, not the teachings, the personalities into Buddhism, still using Buddhist teachings, then Buddhism would have been wiped off completely. It wouldn't have reached a time when Shen-Chuang went to India and took these sutras back to China and today become a world religion. So it is a point out of necessity. It is similar conditions now for some of the Chinese here. When you preach to the Chinese ask you, do I have to throw away the Guan Gong in the house? And then in order to accommodate, you say there is no need. Not necessary. So you still pray to the Buddha, but you put the Guan Gong next to it. And some of us, we try to give explanations to why Guan Gong is next to it. then we say we put Guan Gong next to the Buddha because Guan Gong is the protector of the Dhamma. Protector of Dhamma. So now Guan Gong is accepted by the Mahayana Buddhists, you know. It's a protector of the Dhamma. Jialan Pusa. Guan Gong. Actually, it's a trying to accommodate both ways. So for us, all these are peripherals. And if we can understand, we don't need it. But for those who cannot understand it, let it be. Because they have been praying to Guan Gong for so long now, they cannot get rid of it. They believe it is so much, so they put it by the side, become protector of the Dhamma. Then the Buddha represents the Dhamma in the center. Then that is Jalan Pusa. But we cannot say Guan Gong because Guan Gong go around, is a warrior fighting around, killing people. That is not Buddhistic. So we try to make it more Buddhistic. Now we say he's a Jalan Pusa, he wouldn't kill people. So that is how the Avalokitesvara, so the same principle, the Avalokitesvara, Hindu god, when come to Buddhism, become a Buddhist Bodhisattva in Buddhism, is actually representing nothing but compassion, that's all. Avalokitesvara means compassion. And what are we talking about compassion? That is what the Buddhists trying to preach. Therefore they say you can pray to Bodhisattva, Guan Yin Bodhisattva, you'll be safe. But when you pray to Guan Yin Bodhisattva, you must practice compassion. Otherwise it won't work. Therefore, indirectly you're telling you to practice compassion. We call a skillful means to persuade people to practice compassion. So you can treat the Guan Yin as an embodiment of the virtue of compassion. Okay? Brahmanism actually is Hinduism. Because the Hindus, they believe in the Brahmas, and the Brahmins is a caste. So, Hinduism is a general term we use. When it comes to a time when the Brahmas, or when it comes to a times when the Brahmins control everything about Hinduism, then we call that Brahmanism. So sometimes in the history we say the Buddha was born during the time of Brahmanism. Actually, it's Hinduism. And Hinduism, because Hinduism is not a religion founded by anybody, you know. It's like the Chinese religion. It's not a religion founded by anybody. So Brahmanism means there were a lot of Brahmas they pray also. So it's called Brahmanism. For example, the Chinese religion, you can equate Hinduism, you can equate to Chinese religion. Then Brahmanism, you can equate to Guan Gongism. You see? They pray to also Guan Gong. You see? So I take it as that the Brahmanism is part and parcel of Hinduism.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So bhagava iti pi araham 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 मनुष्यान अनुतरो पुरुष धम्म सारथी लोकविदो सुगतो विद्याधरण संपन्नो विद्याधरण संपन्नो विद्याधरण संपन्नो भगवा बुद्धो तथा देव मनुष्यान अनुतरो पुरुष धम्म सारथी लोकविदो सुगतो विद्याधरण संपन्नो सम्मा संबुद्धो सम्मा संबुद्धो सम्मा संबुद्धो भगवा बुद्धो तथा देव मनुष्यान अनुतरो पुरुष धम्म सारथी लोकविदो सुगतो विद्याधरण संपन्नो सम्मा संबुद्धो अरहं 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 साधु 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 नमो तस्सा भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्सा नमो तस्सा भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्सा नमो तस्सा भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्सा भिक्खुना पंचवर्गिना इति पतन नामके विगदाये धम्मवरा यन्तां निब्बान पापका संपत्ति नामकेन महाब्रह्मेण याचितो ततो सर्वं प्रकाशितो लोकनाथो हरिषै नन्दितं सम्भदेवी सम्भ सम्पत्ति साधका सम्भलोकाय तथाय धम्मचक्रं वनामहे एवं मे सुतो एकं समयं भगवा वाराणस्यां विहरति इति पत्नी विगदाये तत्र को भगवा पंचवर्गी भिक्खु आमन्त्रिति देवी भिक्खवे अण्डापपदितिना न सेवितं वा कथमिति यथायं कामेषु कामसु कलिकानुयोगो हीनो गम्यो पटुजनिको अनार्या अनर्थसंहितो यथायं अट्टकिलमथानयोगो दुःखो अनार्या अनर्थसंहितो इति को भिक्खवे उपान्ति अनुपदम्मा मज्जिमा प्रतिपदा तथागतेन अभिसम्बुद्धा सखुकरणे ज्ञानकरणे उपसमाय अभिज्ञाय सम्बोधाय निब्बानाय सवर्तते कथमस्तु सा भिक्खवे मज्जिमा प्रतिपदा तथागतेन अभिसम्बुद्धा सखुकरणे ज्ञानकरणे उपसमाय अभिज्ञाय सम्बोधाय निब्बानाय सवर्तते अयं विवाहय अथङ्गिको मग्गो संयतिदा सम्मादिष्टि सम्मा संकल्पो सम्मा वाचा सम्मा कमन्तो सम्मा आजीवो सम्मा वायामो सम्मा सति सम्मा समाधि अयं कोसा भिक्खवे मज्जिमा प्रतिपदा तथागतेन अभिसम्बुद्धा सखुकरणे ज्ञानकरणे उपसमाय अभिज्ञाय सम्बोधाय निब्बानाय सवर्तते पटी इदं कोपन विकवे दुःखं अर्य सत्सं दरादिपि दुःखा दरापि दुःखा व्याधिपि दुःखो मरणंपि दुःखं अपि संपयोग दुःखो पिहि विपयोग दुःखो यम्पि स्थानलाभति तम्पि दुःखं संकीर्तेन पंचुमादान कन्नापि दुःखा इदं कोपन विकवे दुःख समुदयं अर्य सत्सं यायन्तन्ना पुनो भविका नन्दिराग सगटा तत्र तत्र विनन्दिनी तयथिदा कामतन्ना भवतन्ना विभवतन्ना इदं कोपन विकवे दुःखनिरोधं अर्य सत्सं यातन्सायैव तन्नाय असितव्यागनिरोधो सागोपतिनिस्सर्गो मति अनालय इदं कोपन विकवे दुःखनिरोधा गामिनी पतिपदा अर्य सत्सं अयं देव अर्याधाङ्गिको मङ्गो तयथिदा सम्मा दिट्ठि सम्मा संकल्पो सम्मा वाचा सम्मा कमन्तो सम्मा आजीवो सम्मा वायामो सम्मा सति सम्मा समाधि इदा दुःखं अर्य सत्सन्ति मे विकवे पुंबि अननु सुति सुधम्मिसु सखोडपादि ज्ञानोडपादि पन्याउडपादि विद्याउडपादि आलोकोडपादि संकोपनिदं दुःखं अर्य सत्सं परिजयन्ति मे विकवे पुंबि अननु सुति सुधम्मिसु सखोडपादि ज्ञानोडपादि पन्याउडपादि विद्याउडपादि आलोकोडपादि संकोपनिदं दुःखं अर्य सत्सं परिजयन्ति मे विकवे पुंबि अननु सुति सुधम्मिसु सखोडपादि ज्ञानोडपादि पन्याउडपादि विद्याउडपादि आलोकोडपादि दुःख समुदयं अर्य सत्सन्ति मे विकवे पुंबि अननु सुति सुधम्मिसु सखोडपादि ज्ञानोडपादि पन्याउडपादि विद्याउडपादि आलोकोडपादि संकोपनिदं दुःख समुदयं अर्य सत्सं पाठभन्ति मे विकवे पुंबि अननु सुति सुधम्मिसु सखोडपादि ज्ञानोडपादि पन्याउडपादि विद्याउडपादि आलोकोडपादि संकोपनिदं दुःख समुदयं अर्य सत्सं परिणन्ति मे विकवे पुंबि अननु सुति सुधम्मिसु सखोडपादि ज्ञानोडपादि पन्याउडपादि विद्याउडपादि आलोकोडपादि इदा दुःखनिरोधं अर्य सत्सन्ति मे विकवे पुंबि अननु सुति सुधम्मिसु सखोडपादि ज्ञानोडपादि पन्याउडपादि विद्याउडपादि आलोकोडपादि संकोपनिदं दुःखनिरोधं अर्य सत्सं सचिकादभन्ति मे विकवे पुंबि अननु सुति सुधम्मिसु सखोडपादि ज्ञानोडपादि पन्याउडपादि विद्याउडपादि आलोकोडपादि संकोपनिदं दुःखनिरोधं अर्य सत्सं सचिकादन्ति मे विकवे पुंबि अननु सुति सुधम्मिसु सखोडपादि ज्ञानोडपादि पन्याउडपादि विद्याउडपादि udapadi aloka udapadi ida dukkha nirodha gamini patipada ariya sasanti vibhikkhave kumpi ananu suti sudammiso sakho udapadi jnana udapadi panya udapadi vida udapadi aloka udapadi Sangko padida dukkha nirodha namini patipadaya satta Kave tambanti mi bhikkhave kumpi ananu suti sudammiso Sakko udapadi jnana udapadi panya udapadi vida udapadi aloka udapadi Sangko padida dukkha nirodha gamini patipadaya satta pavitanti mi bhikkhave kumpi ananu suti sudammiso sakho udapadi jnana udapadi panya udapadi vida udapadi aloka udapadi yavaki vantami bhikkhave imisu tadoso arya sattiso Evanti parivartam dadasakara Yatha bhuta jnana dasanana suvisudam hosi Devatava bhikkhave tadeva ki loki samarake Sabrahma ki sasamana brahmaniya pajaya Tadeva vanastaya anuttaram samma sambodhi abhisambodhoti pasajati Teru takhumi bhikkhave imisu tatoso arya satsiso Evanti parivartam dadasakara Yatha bhuta jnana dasana suvisudam hosi Atha bhikkhave tadeva ki loki samarake Sabrahma ki sasamana brahmaniya pajaya Tadeva vanastaya anuttaram samma sambodhi abhisambodhoti pasanyati Jnananta padami dasana udapadi akopami vimutti ayamati madati natti dani punabhavati Idamavata bhagava atamana pantavargiya bhikho bhagavato bhasitam abhinanduti imasmi